Excellent. So, welcome to the eighth episode of DABEL Tech Talk. I have a great guest with me today. Let me tell you a little bit more about DABEL. So, my name is Dale Bondanza. I am the founder and principal consultant of DAB Enterprises, LLC. I help small and medium-sized businesses make technology less scary. In less than an hour, I can make geek speak less intimidating for you and your organization. For a very small fraction, up to 10% of what you would pay a technology leader, I can point your business in the right direction and help get you to that next tier of success, despite the forces set against you. With me today, I have a special guest by the name of Amit Dannenberg. Amit's background is she is a business-first CIO and an experienced senior leader who is passionate about creating operational excellence through technology. She combines her understanding of business functions with software development rigor to design and deliver effective solutions. Most recently, this MIT MBA, that's correct, she actually went to MIT, even though some of us use that acronym for something else. In her case, it really means the school. So most recently, this MIT MBA was the CIO and Vice President of Enterprise Technology, Data, and Security for Willow Innovations, prior to which she was the head of Enterprise Systems and Data for Butterfly Networks, and Senior Director of Supply Chain Systems and Data Platforms for Sonos. Today, what we're going to talk about is technology is often considered an enterprise solution. It's often seen as a back office function that needs to keep the lights on, or business as usual, as we often say. It's often not seen as a strategic advantage to some enterprises, and even less often seen as a contributor to culture of the company. So, as I said, Amit is with me today, so I'm going to let Amit introduce herself now. Hi,
Hey, Dale.
Amit. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning. Yes, I've had the pleasure of working in technology companies that make a physical product and have a supply chain. And so it struck me even more at how technology can come together, not just to keep the business going, which is sort of the obvious conclusion to it, but also how by picking the right tools and giving it the right attention at all levels of the company, it really can drive and influence how a company works and makes or breaks its culture. And this is true, I think, even for very early on startups. So you don't have to wait to be big when there's a lot of tech debt to take care of. If you think about these things up front, you set yourself up for success from the beginning. And I think that's a very interesting topic and not always something that leaders keep in mind, understandably, as they're trying to keep the lights on and get the company off the ground. But I think it's a key contributor.
Good, good, interesting. Yeah, I look forward to the discussion, because obviously we had a little bit of a pre-chat, so I would understand this better. But we talk about collaboration and sometimes how that's an inhibitor, um, or I should say, what are some of the inhibitors to collaboration? So I think of myself in my organizations, I often help folks out from a PMO perspective. And when I talk about PMOs within IT, I say, the PMO should be the center of the communications in IT. It should be your collaborative hub. But I recognize that oftentimes, not just within IT, but even external to IT, as IT leaders, yourself as a CIO, there's a significant resistance to that collaboration. Can you talk about why that is, or what some of those inhibitors might be?
Yeah, I think the inhibitors I've seen actually come from the what's expected. Actually, it's a conflict between what especially senior leaders are expected when they join a company to hit the ground running and go, go, go. And we've hired you because we've seen what you've done. We've seen your successes in the past. Come bring them and replicate them here at the new place. And also there's a lot of pressure, especially companies that are public, to continuously deliver results. And so what happens is leaders come, they know this expectation and they have this pressure on them. And so they grow their organizations and are very focused on it and bring what worked for them in the past and apply it here because it worked for them in the past. And so what happens is, instead of having the time and being given the time to really understand the new set of people, the new maybe executive team that they're part of and what works for them together, they tend to hunker down on what worked for them in the past, trust that and run with it. And that actually creates silos and is a hindrance to collaboration. And so it's funny in a way because it's almost what the startup needs to run fast. It needs strong leaders that have proven themselves. Yet when you bring them in and you don't give them the time or the ability to or even to their awareness, the fact that they should see what's working in the new place versus what worked in the past, it creates silos and lack of collaboration. And one good example that I can bring is a company that has a physical product and has a supply chain. It goes through a process called S&OP, Sales and Operations Planning, which is really key. It connects the forecast, the demand forecast. How much will people buy? How much the sales team feel people are going to buy the product, and operations that has to make sure that it's manufactured and delivered the right quantities to the right places at the right time to make this magic happen. And so it involves three main pillars in a company: sales, finance, who need to understand the projected revenue, but also the expense that needs to be invested in building the inventory, and operations that has to actually communicate with factories and logistics, and like I said, make the products be at the right place at the right time. And so this S&OP process is something that most companies do on a monthly basis to realign plans. And for it to be really effective, that's where collaboration needs to happen. But what I've seen, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I was just gonna, you bring up an interesting point. Is there anyone, as you're describing that S&OP process, and I say this as an IT guy, so I hope none of my fellow vertical friends outside of IT get offended when I ask this, but do you find that there's any specific vertical or silo within an enterprise that's more resistant than another to that collaboration?
I think the ones that have the hardest time in this is the sales pillar, because it's forecast, and a forecast is always as accurate as a forecast can be. And
Right.
so they tend to sort of more be closed off and have their own thoughts and assumptions built into their plans. And sometimes it's difficult for them to share them, or they'd be resistant to share them because then if they're not correct, it could be held against them. And so there's much more, at least again, from my experience, I've seen that be much more closed. And then people tend to sort of work they create their own spreadsheets where they do their forecast. And spreadsheets are difficult to share. They're difficult to show thoughts and assumptions that are made that are built into these spreadsheets. And so they're very difficult to actually create conversations. And then instead of actually, I think it's hindering sales, because instead of getting input from finance and operations, who are the key partners, they end up being more in their own closed world. And so
Do you have a method that you specifically use to get those salespeople over that hump? Or is that kind of fading into kind of where I was going to ask you about kind of the tools, or, and if it blends, if that's a good lead in, then so be it. But I'm more curious about the human side of it before we get to the tool aspect.
yes, I think the human side of it comes in two areas. One, a forcing function when they sort of realize that the spreadsheets actually break. Excel is a phenomenal product for sure, one of the better ones from Microsoft, but even that has a problem to scale. So as a company grows and it sells more product, it has more SKUs, there are only so many tabs. And also they realize that formulas and stuff, it's very difficult to find errors that are hidden in different Excel cells. And so at some point, they come to the conclusion themselves that, hey, something needs to change in what we're doing. So that always helps, because when there's a problem, people are more inclined to make a change. The other forcing function is when a company does start to feel they're growing and they need a tool, then you actually need to make sure that the chief operating officer who heads operations, normally the CFO and chief commercial officer or chief revenue officer, actually come together and are engaged, whether them and people on their team, on selecting the tool. So by bringing these three functions together and having them be part of the process of selecting the tool, they've first acknowledged that they are working together and they need to all work off the same platform. And also they're in this journey to pick a tool. You know, sometimes that works great and they all agree. And sometimes, like an experience I had where there was an agreement and then again, it was difficult for them eventually to adopt it. But those are the steps that really drive both the mental shift to we need to make a change, and a platform is the way to do it.
Okay. No, that's good to know. So yeah, so let's dive into that tool conversation. And again, obviously not breaking the fourth wall to say that you and I have talked a little bit about this before now, but I was curious as I was thinking about the topic about, the specific example that you have and the tool that you have had success with, but maybe other ones that, maybe you haven't tried, that you might recommend, or ones that you've tried and say, yeah, that sounded good on paper, but it didn't work out. So just kind of curious as to your perspective, but maybe start with the one that worked.
Yeah, definitely. I have two, I think, that I can recommend. And the thing I like is, having worked in smaller companies, these tools can be very costly, and their implementation costs can also run in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But working in a smaller company, those costs were prohibitive. And so what I liked is that there are vendors out there that are focused on smaller companies and are even catered in the amount that you can be self-sufficient and support the tool yourself. And so I really like that. And I found two tools. One that we used called Anaplan. We use that at Sonus and used it really extensively. And we even built an internal center of excellence. We had finance doing their own building out what they needed in operations, and it was really wonderful to see the adoption. The other example that I wanted to talk a little bit more about was for a company called Board. It's a European company that has more recently moved into the US. And I think the reason behind the name is the idea that you bring people around a whiteboard to talk together. And so that's what they want to be, to bring teams together so that they can do planning and forecasting together.
Is
And
it spelled the same way?
yes, yes,
Board? Okay.
exactly the
And
same way.
is it board.com, or it's got to be more complicated than
I
that?
think it's called Board Americas, the
Okay.
US version of it.
Okay.
And we've really it's been um, a a lovely journey with them in just the support and the collaboration that we had, working with them, walking through the different phases of what data, right? The big piece around this is, what is the source of truth for the data that needs to come into the tool, and understanding and getting alignment. So making sure that finance and operations and sales all agree that this is the source of truth. And we're going to bring that into the tool. We're going to refresh it. So every time you look, you see the latest actuals. And then how do we actually break down and make sure that each of these three pillars actually does what they need to do in there? Break it down, because some teams need to work at a lower granularity level, and then it can be rolled up to a higher level as it moves over to finance. Like, for example, finance might not care what color of a particular SKU you're building. They just want to care about that particular product. But when you manufacture, you have to know how many of each color you're actually going to make. So these tools really allow you to break up and roll up pretty easily. And so we had a very good experience overall with that. The problem, though, in my specific example where it broke down is we started off with integrating the data, which fit nicely. We had a NetSuite as our ERP, and we were using BigQuery for our data warehouse, and those integrated very easily with Board. We had the operations team doing supply planning there pretty quickly. Then when we started to integrate sales and finance into the tool, we hit more roadblocks, and that's where I think that there's more that's where the human element of it comes in, and I think where the CEO sort of plays a role in making things happen. But from a tool perspective, it was a wonderful experience working with them.
You brought up two interesting points there, and I'm going to go back to the CEO comment in a minute, but you were kind of touching on it right there, and that's kind of where I wanted to, my background is all about, that people first approach. So what I heard you say as far as the tool is concerned, source of truth, obviously we all understand that from an IT perspective, whether it's your ERP, your CRM, a data warehouse, data lake, some combination thereof. So I heard the data side of it and bringing everybody around the whiteboard or the board to look at the numbers. Again, I'm interested to get your 2 cents on the interaction piece of it. Is what's the conversation that's happening in that collaborative space between the IT leader and the sales leader and the finance leader and maybe the operations leader? What's that beyond the numbers? What's the conversation that's going on between those folks?
Yeah, very good question. There's a lot of, whenever a forecast is done, there's a lot of assumptions that are baked into it. And some of those are based on actuals, and that's where a tool like that helps. So as actuals come in, they are rolled into the tool. And so sales team can say, well, look, we looked at actuals, we looked at trends, this tool also can bring in industry trends. And so especially if you have a cyclical product, you can bring in other industry data and see how things are changing. And as a result, it can help you to be more accurate in your forecast. And so having this tool actually allows you to write notes. And when you bring all these three folks around the table, all using the same tool, it encourages these conversations where sales can say, this is why we picked this number. Yes, it is a big jump from last month or last quarter, but these are the reasons that we think this is the right amount to make. Or another great example is actually in a downturn where sales might say, okay, we want to throttle down the amount we sell. And that's where operations can come and say, well, this could lead to us actually shutting down one of the manufacturing lines. There are implications afterwards to ramping it up again when you want to ramp up sales. Are you okay with that? It could mean, and I've been in situations where the contract manufacturer actually has to lay off people because you've shut down a line. Sales then needs to understand that when they want to turn it up again, it's not going to be an immediate reaction. Are they okay with that? So coming to seeing the numbers all together, having a chance to have those conversations and raise all these different concerns so everybody understands, because sales is removed from operations. They don't necessarily understand what happens on the factory shop floor, but bringing that understanding actually allows sometimes forecasts to maybe be smoothed out a little bit or front loaded, but then finance might come and say, well, we're going to have too high a liability of inventory. Are we okay with that? What are the downturns of that? So it really brings those very collaborative conversations and forces them to happen. And it actually encourages finance to maybe question sales versus sales saying, this is our area. You don't question it. We're giving you the data, take it, and that's it. You're actually encouraging conversation, which is really afterwards that's where it touches I think the culture piece, because then that trickles to other parts of the organization too. And it says, okay, it's everybody has their perspective. It's fair to come and raise questions And if we can answer them and defend them, then that's fine, and let's move on. And if not, maybe it's given us good food for thought and we can
Right.
adjust. Because a forecast is still a forecast. It's
Right.
as
It's
good
still
as
an
we.
educated guess.
Exactly,
It's still
exactly.
we don't like to say that publicly, especially when you're facing Wall Street or investors. But yeah, pretty much your forecast is, it's slightly better than your budget because there should be some actualization around it, but it's still an educated guess at the end of the day. Um, so 2 points that you made me think of, and I actually had to write one down. That's why I had to take my eyes off the screen for a second because you made me write this down as a thought for maybe a future podcast because when you were talking about that collaboration, and maybe it's just because of it's a recent course I took. It's something that all of us as senior IT leaders are very focused on these days. The topic of AI, and when you talk about all the data in this tool and bringing all of these brains together, the sales, the finance, the ops, the manufacturing, the IT. What you made me think of is as we move towards a very data centric, data analytical, data governance, data cleaning perspective, because if our organizations are going to utilize some aspect of AI or generative AI in the future to look at that analysis and that data and to predict those trends and to help us manage and lead the organization better, one of the most important conversations in that AI future is bringing those diverse opinions around the organization together because no one silo within an organization, sales as a good example, can be that leading indicator because they don't necessarily know some of the external factors that might be playing into the data analytics discussion that's coming. So I think your whole topic of collaboration around the data and around the organization and how that brings the culture of the organization together is really key. And that's kind of like that kind of launches us into kind of the final point that we wanted to bring up, and we can kind of take it anywhere you want after this, but is, a lot of times those of us who have spent time in the C-suite, um, there's often an assumption when you get to that C-suite or you get to that 14th floor kind of thing, that, well, Amit's in charge of IT. She is all things IT. She knows her little geek world of infrastructure and apps and project management and finance and procurement. She gets all that stuff. I don't need to manage Amit. And Joshua is in charge of sales. And he is all things sales. He's worked his way up from, a guy that was out in the field selling widgets all the way up to being the chief revenue officer. And Monica, as the CFO, I'm not a bean counter. I can't even pretend to lead that world. So whatever Monica does is great. And they're also senior people. So I'm sure Monica and Jessica and Amit can all work together because they're professionals, right? But what you and I have talked about is that critical role of the CEO, that chief executive officer, that all of these C-level folks report to, have been significantly abdicating some of that leadership responsibility to say that, yeah, you don't have to look into a meets organization to wonder what IT is doing. But what we do need to do is focus more on that collaborative environment, particularly because of the generational impacts of leadership these days, with 4 generations in the workforce, about to be 5. You have a very distinct range of ages and background and diversity. So talk to me a little bit about, what have you seen as far as that CEO perspective, and what do some do well and what could others learn from, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think there's the CEO and the pressure they put on the one hand on their C-suite, but behind them there's the board, right? Especially for a public company, which adds another level of pressure that's put on the CEO and obviously trickles down to the C-levels. And when there's that pressure of deliver on time, that's what we brought you, and we're not necessarily going to give you any grace period. Go, go, go. It actually encourages or even green lights for the C-suite, go and do what you know, right? Like you said in the beginning, fall back on what has been proven strategy for you, which is the reason we've hired you, and go make that happen, versus take the time. You're actually part of this. The C-suite is just as much your team as the team or group or whatever it is that you're leading in the organization. Your colleagues here are just as important, and you have to support them, and they're not there to be against you or to hinder you or to make you be unsuccessful. Actually, they're here to make you be successful. And for example, in what I had with board, where at first we did get buy-in, the CFO and the chief commercial officer and the COO all agreed we were going to use board. We had that buy-in. We committed to a contract. Normally it's multi-year because it takes time also to get up and running. And then there were a few things that happened. One, there was some leadership change. But two, once we got into the finance space, the CFO said, well, not really. I think I'd like to go with a different tool that I've used in the past. And so that put a wrench in the wheels, because instead of then it being one tool that brings everybody and the discussions happen at the same time in the same platform, finance were off working somewhere else. We actually had extra work to integrate that tool into board, and it actually went against the grain. And there was only so much that I was trying to drive this and bring this to consensus, but there is only so much we could do without actually the CEO stepping in and saying, okay, let's bring this to a decision. And that was missing there. And so I think it's important. I think if CEOs were to really understand, and others to understand, how the choice they make on systems actually impacts the culture that they're creating in the company, they would maybe see this at a different level of engagement that's required from them, versus, hey, this is just a technology thing. Let the technology people figure it out. And like you said, they know what they're doing. I'm going to step away. It's not. It actually bringing the C levels together. And when that is done, that is a very powerful message, I think. And it trickles down to the rest of the organization, where it says, okay, they could be different perspectives, but at the end, we compromised and we found a platform that works for all of us. Perhaps not ideal, but we all agreed that this is what we're going to use. We're going to learn a new tool because we feel that that is the right thing for the company. And I think that has a really far-reaching message. And
I agree.
would love
Yeah,
to
leadership by example. What a thing. I
yeah.
agree. Even elements of servant leadership in there to show that, all the C levels can work together and everybody's got each other's back, because we're all here for the same mission. You're with a company because, hopefully it's not just a paycheck. It's, you're contributing and to the mission, vision, principles of the organization, moving it forward. That's always been a thing. One of the things we didn't address at the beginning of this podcast was, obviously your background is a good example. So you're based up in Cambridge, Massachusetts these days, and I'm actually down here in sunny South Florida. So I don't know what that stuff is that's flying through the air behind you. But joking, I was actually born and raised in Buffalo, New York, so I never want to see that stuff again. But to your point about the kind of the different perspectives, have you found that there's a way, or there's things that you've said to one of your CEOs in the past that made he or she kind of get it?
I tried. I was, I think, very direct, maybe too direct, to say, making this decision, and it was more related to a decision around data, not specifically a planning tool, but more around the data and how we want to use it. And I said to the CEO, it's all up to you. This is a decision you have to make. You can't farm it out to others. There was
And then
silence.
And
And
then that's interesting. And then, yeah, okay. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. So what was the response? Yeah, I'm curious.
silence, and I don't think anything, I don't think there was a follow-up much on that, but that's when it really became very clear to me that there are certain things. Yes, the C-levels are empowered and should be driving things, and that's why they were hired. But there are things. At the end, there is a reason that there's a CEO. There is one that brings everybody together and breaks down and brings consensus or drives disagreements and stuff to closure so that they don't fester, forever. That's a bad thing as well. And
Yeah,
a company is not a democracy. At the end, a decision is being made and you get on board and we move on to the next thing.
right.
Right.
Yeah, and I was going to wrap, but I think you kind of also answered this already is even when you're talking about the culture of the organization, how that CEO, how those C-level folks can influence that culture, and then it's seen throughout the rest of the organization. The example is, they interviewed a custodian at NASA, and they asked him as he was mopping the floors one day, what do you do? What do you do here at the Kennedy Space Center? And he goes, I put rockets on the moon, or I put rockets into space. So once you have that level of buy-in, that from the CEO to the person mopping the floors, that everybody believes they're there for the same mission, it's amazing what you can accomplish. And I was going to say then it even rolls on to your customers at some point, right? Because if my folks are happy, if there's a common message, mission of the organization, if we're all behind whatever that mission is, um, that obviously has an effect on your customers. Have you seen that as a direct tie?
I've seen, yes, where you have employees that are happy, especially in companies that have very tight customer support, where it's necessary to resolve problems very quickly because customers can't wait for a while to get a product. You want to understand what their problem is. And when employees feel that they're there for the customer, they all know the reason and how they're contributing to the mission. You definitely see, and then a lot of these customers afterwards go and make it very public, right? Their social media is there for companies to hear firsthand from their customers what they actually think, and so you get feedback very quickly.
Yeah, good point. Good
Yeah.
point. Is there anything, and we're almost at time here, Amit, is there anything that we didn't cover today that you think is important, kind of as a takeaway or a burning desire for folks to understand about how technology can increase collaboration and have an impact on the culture of the organization?
I think there's a lot of tools out there, more new ones coming out, and more looking at sort of price range and affordability for small companies. Think about it early on, I think, because if you structure things and think about it from the beginning, you actually end up collecting data that's clean and usable, right? You're structuring your culture to be collaborative and working off shared tools. You can afford to do that. It's just a little bit of thinking, even while you're trying to get the business off the ground. Give this a little bit of thought. It'll be the culture will scale with a company and will, I think, also enable actually the scaling of the company. So it'll be um, one will help the other. Um, and interested to see how AI plays into that, positive and negative.
Agreed. Agreed. We're going to have to come back and have that conversation.
Yep.
Um, all right, sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Amit, for your time today. If folks want to get in touch with you, I'm assuming they can do that best through LinkedIn.
Please, yeah, I'd be happy to continue the conversation there.
Excellent, excellent. And after, as some of my audience knows, we publish this initial YouTube live, but then what I do is I download that, I put some wrappers around it, and then I re-upload it. So we will put in the chat for this meeting some of the links to some of those tools that Amit mentioned, specifically the board app or any other apps that she might recommend to use as a collaborative tool. And then we'll also drop Amit's LinkedIn in there as well. So thank you again for your time, Amit. I truly appreciate it. And I hope folks continue this conversation with you on LinkedIn.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Dale. It's been lovely.